What if the thing you've been searching for your whole life, peace, purpose, meaning, wasn't hidden in the chaos of big cities, but waiting quietly in a place no one talks about, a place where time slows down and your soul finally catches up? There was a time when I thought movement meant progress. Bigger cities, bigger dreams, bigger everything. But somewhere between the noise of ambition and the silence of exhaustion, I realized something was missing: me. So one day I packed my bags, left behind the constant hum of traffic and the glow of neon lights, and moved to a tiny town most people couldn't even find on a map. Everyone thought I was running away. Maybe I was. But what I found there wasn't isolation, it was clarity. In that little corner of the world, where strangers still wave when you drive by, and the night sky actually shows its stars, I learned truths I never could have heard in the city. And today, I want to share them with you, not to convince you to move, but to remind you of something we've all forgotten sometimes. Smaller doesn't mean less. It means more of what matters. Stay with me till the end, because by the time we're done, you might start questioning everything you've been chasing. In the city, life moves like a race you never signed up for. Everyone's sprinting towards something: a promotion, recognition, validation. But if you stop for just a moment and look around, you'll notice that no one seems to know where the finish line is. The noise becomes normal, the rush becomes habit, and before you realize it, you're running on autopilot. I was part of that rhythm once. My days were filled with deadlines, my nights with endless scrolling, my thoughts constantly chasing what was next. And yet, in the middle of it all, I felt a strange emptiness. It wasn't the absence of things, it was the absence of myself. When I moved to that small town, time changed. Not because the clocks ticked differently, but because I did. The first morning I woke up there, the silence felt almost unbearable. There were no sirens, no horns, no buzzing phones demanding my attention. Just the faint hum of the wind through trees and the sound of birds greeting the day. It was beautiful, but it was also confronting. Silence has a way of exposing what noise usually hides. I could feel my thoughts surface like long-forgotten echoes, asking me questions I didn't want to answer. Who are you when you're not performing? Who are you when no one's watching? At first, I resisted. I filled the quiet with podcasts, music, even the sound of my own voice talking to myself, just to avoid that strange stillness. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to surrender to it. I started sitting on my porch in the mornings with nothing but a cup of coffee. I watched the sun stretch its light across the hills, and I realized I hadn't actually watched a sunrise in years. I'd only seen it through car windows or building reflections. In that stillness, I began to feel my own rhythm return, the one that had been buried under years of chasing, comparing, and rushing. There's something sacred about slowing down. It doesn't mean you're giving up or falling behind. It means you're giving yourself permission to be present, to inhabit the moment instead of racing past it. In that tiny town, I saw people move with purpose, not panic. The baker took his time kneading the dough, not because he was lazy, but because he respected the process. The old man who mowed his lawn didn't rush it like a task to be checked off. He did it like a ritual, greeting each blade of grass with care. They weren't trying to beat the clock. They were living inside it. I began to notice the little details again. The creak of old wood beneath my steps, the way the afternoon light painted gold over the fields, the laughter of children echoing down the main street. These small, ordinary moments carried a quiet weight, like they were whispering reminders of what it means to be alive. The city had taught me to look for meaning in big moments. Promotions, milestones, achievements. But here, meaning revealed itself in the smallest of things. And maybe that's the truth we forget when we move too fast. The extraordinary often hides inside the ordinary, waiting for us to slow down long enough to see it. Slowing down also meant confronting the discomfort I'd been running from. In the rush of city life, there's no time to feel deeply. We numb ourselves with business. We call it productivity, but it's really just avoidance disguised as success. When everything slowed, the emotions I'd buried began to surface. Regret, exhaustion, longing. It was painful, but it was also freeing, Because when you allow yourself to feel again, you allow yourself to heal. You begin to realize that life isn't supposed to be a blur of motion. It's meant to be experienced, tasted, absorbed. There was a day when I took a walk down the dirt road leading out of town. It stretched for miles, lined with trees that had probably been standing there for 100 years. As I walked, the world around me seemed to breathe in rhythm with my steps. The sound of the wind became a conversation, the crunch of gravel underfoot a kind of music. For the first time in a long time, I felt connected, not through a screen, not through achievement, but through presence. I was where I was supposed to be, doing nothing but existing fully in that moment. I realized how unnatural it had become for us to stop. We're conditioned to believe that slowing down means losing momentum, that resting means wasting time. But maybe that's the biggest illusion of modern life. The truth is, stillness isn't the absence of progress, it's the birthplace of clarity. When the noise fades, your inner voice gets louder. You begin to see what actually matters and what doesn't. You start to remember the dreams that aren't about applause, but about peace. I saw this lesson reflected in the people around me. The farmer who tended his land with patience, understanding that some things can't be rushed. The woman who ran the small library and spent her afternoons reading to children. Not because it paid much, but because it mattered. They taught me that fulfillment doesn't come from constant striving. It comes from alignment. When what you do connects with who you are. There was a calmness in their eyes I rarely saw in the city. A kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to prove anything. They didn't seem to chase life. They seemed to walk beside it. And in that simplicity there was power. It made me question everything I thought I knew about success. Maybe success isn't the volume of your achievements, but the depth of your peace. Maybe slowing down isn't about escaping the world. It's about re-entering it more fully, more consciously, more human. When I began to embrace the slower rhythm, I noticed how much beauty I had been overlooking. The way sunlight filtered through the leaves at different times of the day, how the air smelled after rain, the unspoken kindness in small gestures from strangers. These weren't grand moments, but they carried a kind of grace that felt infinite. The world hadn't changed, my pace had, and in that shift, life unfolded differently. It struck me how addicted we've become to speed. We chase faster cars, faster internet, faster results, as if velocity itself could give meaning. But what if speed isn't a sign of progress? What if it's a symptom of disconnection? When everything moves too quickly, nothing sinks in. The conversations blur, the experiences fade, the joy passes by unnoticed. Slowing down isn't just about time, it's about depth. It's choosing to experience rather than consume, to breathe instead of just exist. In that town, I learned to measure my days differently, not by how much I accomplished, but by how deeply I lived. Did I notice the sky today? Did I speak with kindness? Did I feel present in my own skin? These became my quiet markers of success. And though the world outside kept spinning at its usual, relentless pace, I found something I'd been missing for years: the courage to move slowly in a world that worships speed. In the city, connection is everywhere, or at least it looks that way. You can walk down a crowded street surrounded by thousands of people and still feel completely invisible. You can have hundreds of notifications, thousands of followers, and still feel like no one really knows you. It's strange, isn't it? How we've built a world where we can talk to anyone, anytime, yet somehow, we've forgotten how to be with each other. When I moved to that tiny town, I didn't realize how much I'd forgotten the simple art of human connection. The kind that doesn't need an agenda, doesn't depend on a Wi-Fi signal, and doesn't come with an algorithm deciding who you should care about. At first, I kept my distance. The people in the town were friendly, but I wasn't used to that kind of openness. In the city, a stranger smiling at you usually meant they wanted something: your time, your attention, your money. So when someone waved from across the street or stopped just to ask how my day was going, it caught me off guard. I remember one morning, I went into the local store to buy some groceries. The woman at the counter asked where I was from, and when I told her, she laughed and said, "You'll get used to the quiet eventually." I smiled politely, expecting the small talk to end there. But it didn't. She told me about her family, how she'd grown up in that town, and how everyone looked out for each other because, well, that's just what people did there. When I left, she said, "Welcome home." I had never met her before, but those words lingered in my mind the entire walk back. Over time, I started noticing a pattern. People here didn't treat relationships like transactions. They weren't calculating what they could get from you. They cared because caring was part of who they were. The old man down the road fixed his neighbor's mailbox after a storm without being asked. The mechanic offered to check my car for free just to make sure it would handle the winter roads. Kids helped stack firewood for the elderly without expecting anything in return. These weren't acts of charity. They were acts of community. It made me realize how different the energy of connection feels when it's born out of genuine care rather than convenience. In the city, everything revolves around efficiency. You can get your groceries delivered, your meals brought to your door, your clothes washed, and folded by strangers you never see. On the surface, it feels like progress, the ability to get more done, to move faster. But something subtle gets lost in that process: the human touch, the exchange of stories, the small talk that turns into trust, the simple acknowledgement that we share this world together. In that tiny town, things took longer. The line at the post office moved slowly because people actually talked to each other. The barista didn't rush to make your coffee because she was asking how your morning was going. And while part of me wanted to tap my foot and check my watch, another part of me started to soften. It was like time expanded when people took time for one another. Every interaction carried warmth, and that warmth began to thaw something inside me I didn't know had gone cold. I remember one evening, I was walking home from the small diner on the edge of town. It had started to rain, and I didn't have an umbrella. Out of nowhere, a truck pulled over. It was one of my neighbors, a man I'd only met twice. He rolled down his window and said, "Hop in, you'll catch cold." I hesitated for a moment out of habit, because in the city, kindness always came with suspicion. But then I looked at his face, genuine, unhurried, and I got in. We drove in silence most of the way, the sound of rain hitting the windshield. Before dropping me off, he said something simple: "We look out for each other here." It wasn't a rule or a slogan, it was a way of life. That night, I realized something that has stayed with me ever since: connection doesn't thrive on abundance, it thrives on intention. You don't need a crowd to feel belonging. You need presence. You need people who notice when you're not around, who remember your name, who ask about your day because they actually care about the answer. In the smallness of that community, I found a depth of relationship that big cities rarely allow, because their relationships weren't rushed. They were nurtured, like gardens that bloom only when given time and attention. And it wasn't just about people helping people. It was about how that help built invisible threads of trust that tied everyone together. When someone fell ill, others brought food without being asked. When a roof needed fixing, a few neighbors showed up with hammers and ladders. When someone's dog went missing, the whole town helped search. These acts weren't grand or dramatic, but they formed the foundation of something profound, a sense of belonging that no social network could replicate. I started to notice how my own behavior changed. I began waving back at strangers, offering to help where I could, taking time to listen instead of rushing through conversations. I started remembering names, stories, faces. I stopped treating interaction like an interruption. The walls I had built to survive the city slowly came down, and in their place, something real began to grow: empathy. It's a strange paradox. In a world that's more connected than ever before, people are lonelier than ever before. We've mistaken access for closeness and communication for connection. But the truth is, real connection asks something of us. It asks for our time, our attention, our vulnerability. It asks us to be present enough to care, even when it's inconvenient. And maybe that's why it flourishes in small towns. Because there, life itself slows down enough for those moments to exist. There was a day when a storm hit the town hard. Power went out, trees fell, roads flooded. And yet, within hours, People were checking on each other. I saw neighbors sharing generators, delivering hot meals, opening their homes to anyone who needed warmth. No one waited for permission, no one asked for credit. They just acted, because connection wasn't something they talked about. It was something they lived. That night, as I sat by candlelight in my small home, listening to the rain and the distant hum of voices helping each other, I realized how starved I had been for that kind of humanity. In the city, I used to fill that hunger with distractions, endless scrolling, work, entertainment. But here, the nourishment came from something ancient and simple, people showing up for each other. It reminded me that we don't need constant stimulation to feel alive. We need each other. We need shared laughter, shared silence, shared care. We need the reassurance that we're seen, not through a screen, but through the eyes of someone standing right beside us. Connection, I learned, doesn't happen by accident. It's built one small act of kindness at a time. It's remembering the name of the person who bags your groceries. It's helping your neighbor carry something heavy. It's choosing to stay in the conversation a little longer. It's these small, almost invisible gestures that weave the fabric of belonging. In that small town, I saw the beauty of human connection stripped of all pretense. There were no social games, no filters, no need to impress. People simply existed together, aware of each other's presence, aware that life is lighter when shared. It wasn't perfect. There were disagreements, gossip, flaws like anywhere else. But beneath it all was something enduring, something honest. And in that honesty, there was warmth that the city's cold efficiency could never replace. When I left the city, I thought I was running from noise. The noise of traffic, the chatter of ambition, the constant hum of people always needing to be somewhere else. But after I settled into that tiny town, surrounded by fields that stretched farther than I could see, I realized that what I'd really been escaping was myself. The noise outside had kept me from hearing the noise inside. And when it was gone, there was no one left to distract me from my own thoughts. The quiet was unnerving at first. It forced me to confront questions I had buried under business. Why was I always restless? Why did I feel incomplete no matter what I achieved? What was I really chasing? For a long time, I believed happiness was something waiting for me just beyond the next milestone. I thought I'd find it when I earned more, traveled more, became more. But the truth is, I was moving so fast that I never gave happiness a chance to catch up. In that small town, the pace of life stripped away everything unnecessary. Without the constant rush, I started noticing the things I used to overlook. The smell of rain, the laughter of children playing outside, the warmth of sunlight through a kitchen window. Those moments didn't shout for attention, they whispered. And I realized I had spent years too busy to hear them. One afternoon I sat on the front steps of my little house, watching the sky turn gold. There was nothing particularly special about that day. No event, no success, no grand story. But as I sat there, something in me shifted. For the first time in a long while, I felt content without needing a reason. It wasn't the kind of happiness that explodes. It was the kind that hums quietly in the background of your soul. And that's when I understood that happiness doesn't live in achievement or applause. It lives in presence. It's not found when you reach the top of the mountain. It's found when you finally stop climbing for a moment and breathe. In the stillness, I began to see how much of my life had been driven by fear. The fear of missing out, of not being enough, of falling behind. The world has a way of convincing you that happiness is always somewhere else. In the next job, the next relationship, the next version of yourself. And so we keep running, hoping that if we just move fast enough, we'll outrun the emptiness inside. But the truth is, you can't chase your way into peace. Peace comes when you stop running. When you sit with yourself long enough to listen. There's a kind of detox that happens when life slows down. The constant stimulation of city living dulls your sensitivity to the small joys. But in the quiet, your senses come back to life. The taste of food becomes richer, the sound of laughter more sacred, the moments of solitude less lonely and more restorative. I started walking at dusk, not to exercise, not to burn calories, but just to be. The world looked different when I wasn't rushing through it. I saw the way light caught the dust in the air, how the shadows danced on old fences, how the world breathed in a rhythm that didn't need my interference. Happiness, I realized, isn't a reward. It's a state of alignment, when your inner world finally matches the simplicity of what's around you. In that tiny town, there wasn't much to do, and at first that scared me. No constant entertainment, no endless distractions. But gradually that simplicity became a kind of freedom. Without so many choices, I began to appreciate the few that really mattered. I cooked my own meals, tended a small garden, talked to my neighbors on quiet evenings. Life became less about what's next and more about what's now. There was a woman who ran a small bakery near the center of town. Every morning, she'd wake before sunrise, kneading dough by hand, smiling as she worked. I asked her one day why she did it. Didn't she ever get tired of the same routine? She laughed and said, "Why would I? Every loaf is a little different, and every morning is a new chance to make someone's day sweeter." That simple answer stayed with me. It wasn't the work that brought her joy, it was her presence in the work. She wasn't chasing anything. She was simply being. That conversation made me think about how much energy we waste trying to arrive somewhere when maybe we're already there. The idea that happiness exists in the future keeps us from feeling it in the present. We keep waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect condition, the perfect version of ourselves. But perfection never comes. Life isn't about waiting for happiness to appear. It's about recognizing it in the ordinary. In the smell of fresh bread, in the quiet of early morning, in the warmth of a shared smile. There were days when loneliness crept in, when I missed the buzz of the city, the lights, the movement. But even in those moments, something in me was changing. I started to see that solitude and loneliness aren't the same thing. Solitude is an invitation. A space where you can hear your own thoughts clearly, where you can find out what truly matters to you without the noise of everyone else's expectations. I realized I'd spent most of my life surrounded by people but disconnected from myself. It took the quiet of a small town to finally make peace with my own company. And the more I learned to sit with myself, the more I began to understand that happiness doesn't come from filling every silence. It comes from embracing it, from trusting that you don't need constant validation to feel alive, from realizing that joy doesn't always look like excitement. Sometimes it looks like calm. It's the kind of joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. It just is. There was a night when I walked outside and looked up at the sky. It was clear, full of stars, the kind of sky you never see in the city because of the light pollution. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. It felt like the universe was exhaling with me. And in that moment, I understood something simple, but profound. Happiness doesn't ask for much. It doesn't demand luxury or recognition. It asks for awareness, for the courage to be here, now, with all that you are, without needing to become someone else. We spend so much of our lives believing happiness is complicated, but it isn't. What's complicated is our habit of searching for it in all the wrong places. We think it's somewhere out there, waiting to be earned, when in truth, it's been quietly waiting for us to slow down long enough to notice it. The laughter of children, the warmth of a home, cooked meal, the feeling of dirt under your fingernails as you plant something and watch it grow. Those are the things that fill the spaces that ambition never can. As I settled into that life, I started realizing that the more I stopped wanting more, the happier I became. It's ironic. The less I had, the richer I felt. Because the richness came not from possessions, but from perception. From seeing beauty in what I already had instead of mourning what I didn't. The sunsets didn't become more beautiful. I just finally learned how to see them. I used to think happiness was something you pursued. But maybe it's not something you chase. Maybe it's something you return to. Maybe it's what remains when all the striving, comparing, and pretending falls away. When you strip life down to its essentials. The people you love, the air you breathe, the moments that make you feel alive. You realize happiness was never missing. You were just too distracted to feel it. And as the days turned into months, I noticed that I stopped looking ahead so much. I stopped measuring time by what I accomplished, and started measuring it by how deeply I felt. Some days were simple, even uneventful, but they were real. And in that reality, I found a kind of peace that the noise of the city had never been able to give me.